Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1337A, and today's date is July 20th, 2017, and the title of the episode is, Has the Fed Used the Same Tactic to Fool the People Again? Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, over the many years, the corporate media, the central banks, they keep everyone in the dark, and what they do is they tell you that, if we give you more debt, everything's going to be okay. If we give this country more debt, everything is fine, and the corporate media backs them up, and everyone believes that everything is good to go. But we've been following Greece, for instance, and we see that, no, things are not well whatsoever. And we knew as they continually take on more and more debt, the problem in Greece was going to get worse. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Now, remember, going back to the economic crisis, the Great Recession of 2008, Greece at that point, well, since that time, it has never recovered. Actually, the home prices in Greece between 2009 and 2014, they declined by 34%. And now the Bank of Greece released some official data showing that the first quarter of 2017, apartment prices were on average down by 1.8%. Now, when we look at home prices, we can see that home prices have also dropped, and right now they've lost a third of their value in 5 years. So the situation in Greece is not going well whatsoever. Now, in other places in Europe, we can see the bubbles, the housing bubbles, have been propped up, and we can see that in certain areas, yes, the prices of homes are rising. But what's going to happen is that bubbles are going to pop all over the place. And we can see out in Canada, they have a huge housing bubble. We see in Australia, we see in the United States, we see in the UK, and a lot of these areas, the housing bubble is already starting to deflate. And we're already seeing signs of this. And it's just going to get worse as we move forward. Now, we talked a lot about minimum wage and how all these states were voting to get more pay for their workers, which is absolutely fantastic. The problem is we need to go to the root of the problem because, as we've seen in the past, this is not a fix. This is a Band-Aid fix. Because what happens when corporations say, wait, I have to pay this worker a lot more money? Well, what they then do is they turn towards technology. And they get rid of those people. And we're starting to see that in McDonald's. We're starting to see it in Walmart. Right now, Walmart is replacing 4,000 employees with machines. Machines that will count cash. Now, there used to be individuals that kept the books. They counted the cash. And now they're being replaced. And this is not just happening in the back office. It's also happening in the front, where we see that cashiers, they're being replaced by you do it yourself, self-checkout. And if we look at McDonald's and many other places, all these minimum wage workers, they're completely disappearing. Now, the problem is that the value of the dollar continually decreases, and it's decreasing over time. This is because of the central bank. This is because they're loaning the money to the government. And the government is out of control. They're just spending like crazy. So they have to loan more money to pay for the interest, which means they need more taxes from the people to make up the difference, and they need to pay back the Federal Reserve. And this situation, it's not going to disappear. It's going to get worse as time goes on, as we've seen since 1913, especially after 1971 when we came off the gold standard. And what we're seeing right now is a complete and utter breakdown of the system. Wages are declining. There are no jobs. Retail, they're laying off left and right. The food industry is starting to falter, and we're starting to see that everything is starting to come to an end. Now remember, in the beginning of the system, back in 1971 when we came off the gold standard, the partial gold standard, all of a sudden we had high interest rates. They were creating currency like crazy, and everything inflated. Wages inflated. House prices inflated, and everyone thought this was great. 40 plus years later, we're at the back end of a system that is dying. That's why we see the opposite happening right now. This is why we see wages declining. This is why we see manufacturing, poof, gone, out of the country, too expensive. This is why we see minimum wage all the way up to $15. This is why we see people trying to find jobs that just don't exist anymore. This is why we see the retail sector collapsing, the food industry collapsing, the housing market collapsing, and that's going to lead into many more things. I mean, we're already seeing the rental growth in the U.S. It is decelerating right now, which means people can't afford rents. Just like used car prices, they're also coming down right now. And this is going to be a major problem. Now, single-family rents, as measured by CoreLogic, they're reporting that rents right now are seeing a decline during the last 18 months. Now, what's very interesting about this is if we go back to 2006, going into 2007, we hit the peak of rental growth, and then it started to come down. Here, we reached the peak of rental growth around the middle of 2016, and it's starting to come down. We're seeing the same exact patterns once again. Now, again, this is on average. There are going to be places that are still strong, and there are going to be places that are very weak. But on average, we're seeing the same exact signs. And eventually what happens to those places that are seeing strong rental, where rental prices are up, they're going to start coming down, because we've seen this before. We've seen it during 2008, and we're seeing the same exact signs once again. We are now seeing all the soft data that's coming in. Well, it's starting to line up with the hard data, and we've been looking at the hard data, and we're seeing that hard data is continually declining. Now, the Philly Fed numbers came in. They're soft data points, and they're completely one gigantic disappointment. And we can see that they're following the same pattern as the hard data. And we see that the Philly Fed survey, well, it completely missed expectations. It dropped to 19.5, and this is the lowest since November of 2016. New orders collapsed, employees tumbled, average work week slumped. So we can see that things are, well, headed south at this point. Now, what's very interesting is the corporate media. They're running almost the same articles that we saw prior to the housing collapse. And I saw out of Yahoo, Finance Yahoo, the headline reads, "Too many Americans are buying homes they can't afford." Now, a lot of the individuals that have purchased homes, well, they have used no money down. They have very low interest rates, or maybe variable interest rates. And we're seeing the same exact patterns as we've seen prior to 2008. A lot of these homes are not even purchased by Americans, but it's very interesting that they're showing that people have purchased homes, around 40 million Americans, where they purchase these homes and they can't really afford them. And this is exactly what happened prior to 2008. This research is coming out of Harvard University. So we're seeing the same exact signs that we've seen in the housing industry. And what is happening here, as we've seen before, people have purchased the houses at the height of the market. Now the market's starting to come down. Now, of course, people want to refinance. People are saying, oh, wait, this house is very expensive. I have a variable mortgage, and now rates are going up a little bit and I can't afford this. Well, we're seeing the same exact signs, and they're starting to run the articles, which tells us that strange things are ahead of us. We see the ECB right now is going to keep rates. QE is going to be unchanged, but they said something very interesting, and it's the same thing the Fed has said. They will increase QE if the economic outlook worsens or the financial conditions become inconsistent with further progress towards a sustained adjustment in the path of inflation. And basically they're covering themselves because they know this economy is completely fake. They know it's built on an illusion. They know the economy is going to turn downward. And the Fed and the ECB, they're already making preparations to say, listen, if the economy collapses, we will step in once again and save it, because we will pump stimulus in like you've never seen before. And they are prepared and ready to do this. And we know that they need to do this to keep their illusion alive. But during this downturn, things are going to be completely different. Now, Brandon Smith is out there, and he's looking at what the Fed has said, especially Janet Yellen, where she said that we're not going to see any type of financial crisis in our lifetime. And he is saying that the Fed is playing the same games that it played going all the way back in time to 1913. Nothing has really changed. And he's saying that you can bet that they're going to be raising interest rates. Now, once again, they're going to raise interest rates to get that trigger. They want the trigger, and then they're going to back off. Now, they might have thought they had the trigger. They might raise it one more time. But we can see at this point that the central banks, they play this game and they fool the people almost every single time. I mean, think about 2008, for instance, when Ben Bernanke was out there in the year of 2008 saying that we're not forecasting any type of recession. This is the same thing, pretty much what Janet Yellen is saying. And we can see that during that period of time, they already knew that everything was rapidly falling apart. The real estate market was falling apart. The subprime securities, they knew that was completely fake. They knew that Bear Stearns was having a trouble. They knew that many of the other corporations were having a trouble. They already knew what was happening. They already had seen what was happening in the economic realm. And I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about the real economy. They can see this just like we can see this. We've been following the economy. We've been looking at all these different sectors. We see how it's been deteriorating. They know what's going on. I mean, they're not going to admit it. Hell, all our policies just failed, and that's why the real economy is falling apart. No, they need to keep the illusion alive. They need to keep you looking at the stock market. They need to pretend that everything is great until the very last minute, where then they point the finger someplace else, and then they step in and say, listen, we can fix this. It's very easy. All we need to do is bring down the interest rates. All we need to do is start up stimulus once again, and everything will be fine. We've seen this before. And yes, the Fed, the central banks around the world, they are playing us like fools. They think they can get away with this one more time. But we're on to them. This is the reason we're watching and tracking. This is why we're not going, listening to the corporate media saying housing is fantastic, retail is incredible, everything's going online. The Fed says everything's great, inflation's low. No, we've been looking at the real numbers. We've been tracking from the beginning all the stores that have been closing. We've been looking at the corporate tax receipts, how they've been declining. We've been looking at the federal tax receipts, the state tax receipts, how they've been declining, which means people don't have work. We've gone through the unemployment numbers to show that these are completely fake, phony, and false. And here we are at the end of all of this, where we're supposed to be a service economy, and we are not. The Fed right now understands this. They already know that they've built an illusion. They're never going to let on because they want control. This is why they're playing us like fools. But there are a few of us out there that have been looking at this, and we know exactly what's going on. Just like going back to 2008 during the subprime security, there were a few individuals that were talking about what was going on, how the economy is in a bubble, how it's going to pop. Actually, Peter Schiff, he was on all the corporate media channels back in 2006, 2007. People were laughing at him at the time, saying, oh yeah, when is it going to crash? It's 2006, hasn't crashed yet. 2007, hasn't crashed yet. And he was continually saying, yes, we're getting to that point. He doesn't know exactly when, but it will crash. And guess what happened? It did. And once again, we're going through the same exact thing, where we've been tracking, we've been watching, and we understand what is happening. Yes, they kicked the can down a lot longer than everyone thought. They learned from their mistakes. They created these policies that we've never seen before. But eventually what happens, people lose faith. Reality sets in. And there's nothing you can do when reality sets in. Just like they can't force people to spend money they don't have, especially when they're losing jobs. I mean, the manipulation only goes so far. You could tell the world we're at, 0.1% unemployment. But if you have 150 million people on food stamps and nobody's working, those statistics mean nothing. And that's what we're seeing today. So once again, the central banks around the world, they're trying to fool us, but we know what is happening. This is why we've been getting prepared. This is why we're ready. This is why we've been tracking this. So we know what to expect. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.